There's a specific feeling that comes when everything in your life finally clicks into place, like the puzzle pieces you've spent years trying to fit together finally fall into alignment. I felt that way the day I stepped into my brand new apartment. After 6 long years of hustling and grinding, I could finally say that I owned my own home. My name is Julie, and I'm 29. This is my story, one I never imagined I'd be telling. 2 years ago, I remember exactly when my life took a sudden turn for the better. I got a promotion at work, and when my boss called me into his office, I honestly thought I was in trouble. Instead, he handed me a new contract, one with a significantly higher salary. From that moment, I lived like a monk. No fancy clothes, no expensive dinners, nothing. Every single cent went straight into my savings account, but if I'm being honest, it wasn't just my discipline that made all of this possible. A year ago, my grandmother passed away. She was my mother's mother, and although I was heartbroken, she left me $150,000 in her will. That money, combined with everything I had saved, was the turning point. It meant I could stop dreaming and finally start searching for my own home. When I found this 2-bedroom apartment, I knew instantly that it was the one. Not too big, not too small, just perfect. And the best part? No mortgage. The realtor was so stunned when I told her I wanted to pay in full that I thought she might faint. The look on her face when I signed those papers? Priceless. I couldn't help myself. As soon as I had the keys, I snapped a million photos and posted them all over social media. My friends went wild. Congratulations flooded my phone, and everyone was excited for me. "Living the dream, Julie. When's the housewarming party?" they commented. For the first time in a long time, it felt like everyone was genuinely happy for me. But then my phone rang. The name on the screen made my stomach drop. It was Dad. "Julie," he said, his voice rough like sandpaper. "I need you to come over for lunch next Saturday." That phone call brought back everything I'd been trying to forget. You see, my mom passed away when I was 9. Cancer. It shattered our family, but Dad didn't stay single for long. Within a year, he married Sharon, and a year after that, they had my half-sister, Amy. Sharon never really liked me, even before she had her own kid, but after Amy was born, things went from bad to worse. Suddenly, there were all these new rules, and funny enough, they only seemed to apply to me. "Julie, you need to be quieter. Julie, you can't have friends over. Julie, turn that music down right now." Meanwhile, Amy got everything. New clothes, the latest toys, family trips were planned around her schedule. It felt like I'd become a ghost in my own home, floating around while Dad and Sharon doted on their precious daughter. Sometimes I wondered if they even remembered I existed. Thank God for Grandma Margaret. I don't think I would have survived those years without her. As things at home got worse, I spent more and more time at her house. It was only 15 minutes away by bike, and her door was always open for me. Her house became my sanctuary. My cousins, Jack, Emma, and little Tommy, were often there too. Unlike Amy, they treated me like family. We'd spend hours playing board games, watching movies, or just hanging out in Grandma's backyard. Back at Dad's house, things continued to spiral. Amy had become a nightmare. She'd hide my things, spill drinks on my homework, and spread rumors about me at school. But no matter what happened, I was always the one blamed. "Julie, why are you making Amy upset?" Sharon would demand. "Julie, stop antagonizing Amy," Dad would echo. Neither of them ever bothered to hear my side. Then came the happiest day of my life. The day I got my college acceptance letter. It wasn't just because I got into a great school or the partial scholarship, though that was a huge deal. It was because it meant I could leave. The college was 3 states away, and Grandma helped cover what my scholarship didn't. College was like fresh air after being underwater for years. I threw myself into my studies, called Grandma at least twice a week, and tried to forget about everything back home. Dad rarely called. He was too busy with Amy. When he did, our conversations were always short and superficial. After graduation, I had to come back to my home state for a job offer from Thompson and Mills. I assumed I'd stay with Dad and Sharon until I found my own place, but Sharon quickly shut that down. "Oh, we gave your room to Amy," she said with false sympathy. "She needs the extra space for her things. You understand, right?" Dad didn't say a word to defend me, not one word. Thankfully, Grandma welcomed me with open arms. I stayed with her while I started my new job. After a few months, I had enough saved up to rent my own little apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Then a year ago, Grandma passed away suddenly. She had a stroke in her sleep. She left her house to my cousins, which made sense since they lived closer and had always helped her maintain it. To me, she left $150,000. Money she had saved her whole life for the granddaughter who reminded her so much of her daughter. The past year has been quiet. Dad and his perfect family haven't bothered much with me. They didn't even invite me for Christmas. Not that I was surprised. I spent it with Aunt Sarah and my cousins instead. Honestly, it was the best Christmas I'd had in years, and now I was on my way to my father's house for the lunch he'd insisted I attend. The closer I got to their neighborhood, the tighter the knot in my stomach became. I checked the time. 11:57. Still early, but I'd rather be too early than give Sharon another reason to complain about me. When I rang the doorbell, I counted the seconds until someone answered. Dad opened the door. His face was unreadable. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. No greeting, no, "How are you?" Just, "Come in." They were all waiting in the living room. Sharon perched in her favorite armchair like a queen on a throne, and Amy was sprawled on the couch, staring at her phone. Sharon barely acknowledged me with a curt nod. Amy didn't even look up. "Sit down," Dad said, gesturing to the empty chair across from them. I felt like I was walking into an interrogation. The silence hung in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Dad cleared his throat and began. "Amy has graduated high school," he said, as if it were breaking news. "She's enrolled in the local college." I nodded, unsure of where this was going. Was I supposed to congratulate her or send a graduation gift? I wasn't even invited to the ceremony. "That's nice," I said carefully. "She needs somewhere to live," Dad continued, his eyes fixed on a point above my head. "Somewhere close to campus." Another pause. Sharon nodded along like one of those bobbleheads on a dashboard, and then Dad looked at me. "Your apartment would be perfect," he said. I blinked, unsure if I had heard him right. "I'm not looking for a roommate," I said slowly. Dad shook his head. "You misunderstand, Julie. We're not asking you to let Amy live with you. We're asking you to give her your apartment." I actually laughed, short and sharp, but the look on their faces told me they were serious. "Give her my apartment?" I repeated. "The one I just bought? The one I worked years to afford?" "Yes," Dad said firmly, like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Amy needs it more than you." I stared at them, trying to process what was happening. They wanted me to just give away the apartment I had saved every penny for, the one I had bought with my inheritance from Grandma. Amy, the girl who barely acknowledged my existence, was the one they thought deserved it more than me. "She deserves it more than you do," Sharon said, her voice dripping with that same condescension she'd always used on me. "After all, what have you done to deserve such a nice place? Living alone in a 2-bedroom apartment while poor Amy has to consider student housing?" I shot to my feet so fast that my chair almost tipped over. "Are you completely insane?" My voice came out louder than I expected. "I'm not giving up my apartment. Not now. Not ever." Dad's face darkened. "Your own money? Your grandmother gave you $150,000. That's hardly your own money." Something snapped inside me. All those years of staying quiet, taking their abuse, trying to be the bigger person, it all vanished in an instant. "You mean my mother's mother?" I snapped. "The woman who actually cared about me when you were too busy playing happy family with your new wife and daughter?" I saw Amy finally look up from her phone, her face scrunching up in that way that always preceded her crocodile tears. "You're such a terrible sister," she wailed. "You've always been so mean to me. You've never loved me." Dad's voice was cold, harder than I'd ever heard it. "I'm very disappointed in you, Julie. This is not how we raised you." "You didn't raise me at all," The words exploded out of me. You checked out the moment Mom died and Sharon moved in. Don't you dare talk about how you raised me. I grabbed my purse and stormed out the door, my body shaking. Behind me, I could hear Amy's dramatic sobs, Sharon's comforting murmurs, and Dad calling my name, but I didn't stop. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. But the next morning, my phone rang again. It was Dad. "Julie," he said before I could even say hello. "Listen to me. You're the older sister. You need to help Amy. This is what family does." Family? I almost laughed. Where was the family when Sharon kicked me out of my room? When Amy was making my life hell? When you didn't even invite me to Christmas? I fired back. "That's different," Dad insisted. "You're being unreasonable. Amy needs your help." I cut him off. "Actually, crazy if you think I'm going to give my apartment to someone who spent her entire life trying to hurt me. Don't call me again about this." I hung up. But it wasn't over. Sharon started texting me, telling me I was jealous of Amy, that I was just like my mother, selfish and ungrateful. I didn't respond, but their words didn't sting like they used to. In fact, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I wasn't going to let them guilt-trip me anymore. A week later, I decided to go ahead with the housewarming party. My apartment was filled with people who actually mattered, friends from work, old college buddies, and my cousins. The sound of genuine laughter and conversation was like a cleansing ritual, washing away the toxicity of the weekend. But then, something unexpected happened. The party was in full swing when Emma called out from the kitchen, "Julie, we're running low on ice!" I was heading toward the freezer when I felt a hand on my arm. It was Jack, one of my cousins, and his usual playful grin was replaced with a serious expression that immediately set off alarm bells in my head. "Hey, I need to show you something," he said, pulling me gently toward the hallway. "Everything okay?" I asked, concerned. "Yeah," Jack replied, his voice lower than usual, "but you might want to sit down for this." I sat down on the edge of my new ottoman, my mind racing. Jack pulled out his phone, hesitated for a second, then handed it to me. "I was at Lorenzo's last night with some friends," he said, his voice still quieter than usual. "Look who I saw in the back booth." The first photo made my heart stop. There, sitting in a dimly lit restaurant booth, was Sharon. But she wasn't alone. A man I didn't recognize had his arm around her, and they were kissing. Not a friendly peck, but a kiss that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The next few photos sent a chill through me. Sharon was laughing, her hand resting on the man's chest. In another photo, he was feeding her a bite of dessert, and they were holding hands. They looked like a couple, intimate, comfortable, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Jack must have noticed my shock because he spoke up again. "I know I shouldn't have taken pictures, but I thought you'd want to see this. I didn't know what to do with them, so I sent them to you." "Please," I whispered. "Send them to me." I couldn't tear my eyes away from the photos, the images of my stepmother's betrayal. It felt like a betrayal of my entire family. After the party ended and my last guest left, I found myself sitting alone in my living room, the photos Jack had sent still in my hands. I couldn't get them out of my mind. Who was this man? And why was Sharon doing this? What did it mean? It didn't take long to track him down. Sharon wasn't exactly subtle, and sure enough, he was right there in her Facebook friends list. Robert Mitchell. A quick click on his profile gave me more than I was ready for. Robert Mitchell had been working at Riverside Insurance for 20 years, the same company where Sharon worked, the same company she'd been with before she married Dad. As I scrolled through his photos, I felt my stomach drop. There were company picnics, office parties, and holiday celebrations, and in so many of them, there was Sharon. Sometimes in the background, sometimes partially out of frame, but always there. It was like she'd been a part of his life long before she came into mine. One photo caught my eye. It was from 15 years ago, a woman sitting on a park bench in a red dress, her face turned away from the camera. But I knew that dress. It was Sharon's. The caption read, "Perfect Sunday afternoon." Sharon had been married to my dad for 3 years by then. I opened another tab to search for more recent photos of Robert. When I saw his face on the screen, everything inside me froze. His eyes, his nose, the slight curve of his mouth. It was all too familiar. I pulled up a recent photo of Amy from my phone and compared it to Robert's image. The resemblance was undeniable. How had I never noticed this before? Amy didn't look anything like Dad, but now it was clear. She looked exactly like Robert Mitchell. The truth was so simple, yet so devastating. Amy wasn't my father's daughter. She was Robert's. For 2 days, I carried this knowledge with me like a secret that weighed a ton. Every time I looked at the photos, I felt sick. My father had been blind to this lie for 20 years, and I'd been a part of that lie, just as much as anyone else. Then, Dad's number flashed on my phone again. I almost didn't answer. But something, curiosity maybe, made me pick up. Julie. His voice was stern, like he thought he had the upper hand again. We need to have a serious conversation. Come to the house now. I wanted to tell him everything right then. The truth about Sharon, the affair, Amy's real father. But something inside me told me to wait, to keep this ace up my sleeve for now. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, my voice calm, steady. I walked into their house later that evening, carrying the weight of everything I knew. Dad and Sharon were waiting in the living room, looking like they'd been rehearsing what to say. Sharon sat there, her usual smirk in place, while Dad stood by the fireplace, trying to look authoritative. I sat down, pretending to be the dutiful daughter one last time. Dad didn't waste time. Your behavior has been disappointing. He started pacing in front of me. This selfishness, this refusal to help your sister, it stops now. Sharon nodded along, her smile wide, and I felt a fresh wave of disgust. I've made a decision, Dad said, his voice hard. Either you sign over your apartment to Amy, or I'm writing you out of my will completely. No inheritance, no family money, nothing. Sharon's face lit up with victory. They thought they had me, but they had no idea what I had in store for them. I forced my face to show a flicker of shock and distress, then whispered, I need to think about this. Good girl, Dad said, his voice softening. Take your time. Think about what really matters. Could I use the bathroom first? I asked, my voice shaky and small. Dad waved his hand dismissively, not even looking at me. Go ahead. Instead of going to the bathroom, I slipped into Amy's room, my old room. Everything was still the same. Pink walls, frilly curtains, the vanity with a hairbrush full of long dark strands. They were Robert's. My hands were shaking as I pulled out a small plastic bag from my pocket and carefully collected a few strands. Next, I slipped into Dad's bedroom. His comb was exactly where it always was, right next to the wedding photo. With trembling hands, I took a few strands of his hair, too. That night, I didn't sleep. I was already researching DNA testing facilities. It wasn't cheap, nearly $2,000 for rush processing, but it would be worth every penny. The next morning, I walked into the facility with my 2 carefully labeled bags. The technician explained the process and assured me I'd have results in a few weeks. A week later, the results arrived. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope, even though I already knew what they would say. The clinical language was unmistakable. The alleged father is excluded as the biological father of the tested child. The probability of paternity is 0%. And just as I read the results, my phone rang. It was Sharon. We're tired of waiting, she snapped, not bothering with a hello. Your father and I need your decision about the apartment, now. I took a deep breath and replied, my voice calm. Actually, I've been thinking about everything. I'll come over for dinner this Saturday. We can discuss it then. The following Saturday evening, I drove to their house, the DNA test results tucked safely in my purse. This time, there was no anxiety, only anticipation. They were all waiting in the living room, looking like cats who had cornered a mouse. Sharon was practically glowing with triumph, Amy was sprawled on the couch smirking, and Dad stood by the fireplace, barely containing his satisfaction. Finally, Amy drawled, "Took you long enough to make the right decision." Dad stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I'm glad you've changed your mind, Julie. This is what family is all about, helping each other." I shrugged his hand off my shoulder, my voice steady. "I haven't changed my mind. I'm not giving up my apartment. Not now. Not ever." Dad's face turned red. "You selfish brat. That's it. You're out of the will. Everything goes to Amy. She's my real daughter." I couldn't help it. I laughed. "Oh, that's interesting," I said, reaching into my purse, "because I have something you need to see." I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope. Slowly, I held it out to Dad, who snatched it from my hands. His eyes were burning with anger, but I couldn't look away. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. He tore the envelope open, not even glancing at the name on the front. The moment he started reading, I could see his face changing. At first, his voice was confident, but as he reached the crucial line, it faltered. The color drained from his face and his hands started to tremble. "Julie, what is this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, the words catching in his throat. "Read it," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Read it out loud." His eyes moved down the page, and as he hit the line that confirmed the truth, I saw his entire world shift. The paper shook in his hands, and I watched him struggle to comprehend what he was reading. Sharon's expression was now one of panic. She tried to snatch the paper from his hands, but he held it tight, his knuckles white. This is a lie!" she shouted, her voice shrill. "She forged these documents. She's trying to turn you against me, against us." I didn't react to her shrieking. Instead, I calmly pulled out my phone and showed him the photos Jack had taken. Sharon's face twisted in shock and denial as I held up the screen. "There," I said quietly, watching the room fall into stunned silence. "There's your wife, locked in an embrace with Robert Mitchell, the man you've been working with for years." The timestamp showed it was only a week ago. Sharon's composure cracked in an instant. She collapsed into the couch, her mask of superiority crumbling, leaving only guilt and panic behind. "David, please, I can explain," she whimpered, but her voice was barely audible, barely holding on to any sense of control. "Explain!" Dad roared, his face turning beet red. "Explain what? How long?" Sharon finally broke. Tears streamed down her face, her voice shaking with emotion. 20 years, she whispered. "He's my colleague at Riverside Insurance. Amy, she's Robert's daughter." The silence that followed was suffocating. The room felt like it was closing in on me, but it wasn't just my breath that was catching. Dad was holding his chest, staring at the woman he'd married, the mother of his child, in complete disbelief. 20 years of lies, gone, in a single moment. "I never wanted you to find out like this," Sharon said weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, David." I stood there, watching the devastation unfold before me, trying to process everything. The truth had come crashing down, and my father was left standing in the rubble of his world. But I wasn't finished yet. Without saying another word, I turned and started walking toward the door. I didn't need to stay and watch any longer. This was a reckoning they'd earned, and I wasn't going to be the one to make it easier. Behind me, I could hear Dad calling my name, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to hear him beg for forgiveness. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, about finally standing up for myself, about realizing that I had spent my entire life trying to please people who would never care for me the way they should. When I left their house that night, I thought I was done with them. But of course, the drama didn't end there. The next week passed by in a blur. I went to work, came home, and tried to process everything that had happened. The truth, however, had a way of making its presence felt, even when I tried to ignore it. Sharon and Amy moved out of Dad's house shortly after the confrontation. I heard through the grapevine that Dad had hired the best divorce lawyer in the city, and that the scandal was spreading through their social circle like wildfire. It wasn't long before Dad's number popped up on my phone again. Part of me didn't want to pick up. Part of me knew that this conversation wouldn't be any different from the others. But there was another part of me, something that still wanted answers, something that wanted to understand what my father was really thinking. I answered, "Julie?" His voice sounded different now. tired, rough, like it had aged 10 years in a single week. "Can we meet? His voice cracked, and I could hear him taking a deep breath before he continued. "I need to talk to you." I could hear the pain in his voice, but it wasn't enough. I wasn't sure I was ready to forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I agreed to meet him. We decided to meet at Carson's Cafe, a small place in the city that I used to visit with Grandma. When I arrived, I found Dad sitting in the corner, staring into an untouched cup of coffee. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past week, his face unshaven, his shoulders slumped. His wedding ring was conspicuously absent. "I filed for divorce," he said without preamble. "Sharon and Amy are gone. I told them to get out of my house." For the first time in a long time, I felt something resembling sympathy for my father. I couldn't help but wonder what it must have been like for him to realize that everything he'd known for so long had been a lie. "I stopped paying for Amy's college, too," he added bitterly. "Why should I pay for another man's child?" I just nodded. There was nothing to say. It didn't matter anymore. I couldn't erase the years of neglect, the way he had chosen Amy over me, time and time again. "I know I've been a terrible father to you," Dad said, his voice raw. "I favored Amy over you. I let Sharon treat you like an outsider in your own home. I didn't protect you. I failed you." I didn't respond right away. I stirred my latte, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. "You did," I said quietly. "And you never would have realized it if you hadn't found out about Amy. If she had been your biological daughter, you would have kept treating me like a second-class citizen. You would have taken my apartment from me and given it to her without a second thought." He flinched, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he reached across the table, as if trying to grab hold of something that had slipped through his fingers. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Give me a chance to make it right. Let me try to be the father you deserved all along." I pulled my hand back before he could touch it. "You can't just fix 20 years of mistakes with a few words, Dad." It was true. Even though a small part of me still wanted to believe that he could change, I knew better. The damage had been done. That was 3 months ago. Since then, we've met a few times. Coffee, lunch, careful conversations about safe topics. He's tried to make up for lost time, telling me stories about Mom that he never shared before, asking about my work, my friends, my life. But full forgiveness? I'm not there yet. Maybe I never will be. The scars from 20 years of rejection and neglect don't heal overnight. And I can't forget everything that happened just because he says he's sorry. As for Sharon and Amy, I hear things through the gossip mill. They moved in with Robert Mitchell, and it seems like they're living the life they'd always planned behind closed doors. But honestly, I don't care. They're part of a chapter in my life that's closed. I'm done with them. After everything that happened, I wasn't sure what was left to salvage. My dad was a stranger to me now, and the relationship with Sharon and Amy was beyond repair. I had taken the first step in standing up for myself, but now it was time to start rebuilding. It wasn't easy. For weeks, I walked around with this strange mix of relief and emptiness. I felt free from the burden of their manipulation, but at the same time, it was hard not to miss the idea of a family, the way things could have been if only my father had chosen me instead of his new life. But I wasn't going to let their mess drag me down anymore. I had worked too hard for too long to let that happen. My apartment, the one I had fought for, was my sanctuary. It was where I could breathe without anyone making me feel like I wasn't enough. It was mine, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. The days after the confrontation passed in a blur. I focused on my work, buried myself in projects, and spent my free time with people who actually cared about me. My friends, the ones who showed up at my housewarming party, were a constant reminder that not everyone in my life was a disappointment. They were the ones who truly mattered. One evening, a few weeks after the drama with my dad had settled down, I was sitting on my balcony, enjoying the rare quiet of my apartment, when I got a text from Emma. "Hey, we're all getting together this weekend for a little impromptu get-together at Jack's place. Want to come?" It's been way too long. I smiled at the invitation. It had been a while since I'd seen them outside of work. I quickly replied, "Count me in. It's been too long." That Saturday, I found myself in the cozy living room of Jack's apartment. The familiar chatter of my cousins and friends filled the air, and it was just what I needed. It was like stepping into a world where things made sense again, a world where I was valued for who I was, not for what I could give or how much I could sacrifice. At one point, as we were all gathered around the kitchen table, Emma, with her usual mischievous grin, leaned over and whispered in my ear, "You know, Jack's got something up his sleeve for you tonight. He's been planning this for weeks." I raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" "You'll see," she teased, her smile widening. Just as I was about to ask more, Jack suddenly stood up and clinked his glass to get everyone's attention. All right, let's make a toast," he said, his voice louder now as he raised his glass. "To Julie, who's finally living life on her terms." The room erupted in cheers, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. It was the kind of moment that reminded me that I wasn't alone. I had family who actually saw me, who cared about me, and that made all the difference. After the toast, Jack pulled me aside, a glint of mischief still in his eyes. "Hey, so I have something for you," he said, handing me a small wrapped box. I blinked, unsure of what this was about. I slowly peeled off the paper and opened the box to find a delicate silver keychain with a tiny key on it. "What is this?" I asked, confused but intrigued. Jack grinned. "It's a key to something new, a place you can go when you need a change of scenery. You know, if you ever want to get away from the city and have some quiet time to think." I stared at the keychain for a long moment, my heart swelling. "Jack, what is this really?" "I rented you a cabin for the weekend," he said, his grin widening. "Up in the mountains. I figured you could use a break. You've been through a lot lately, and you deserve some time to just relax and get away." I was speechless. There was no way I could have expected this. I don't even know what to say. "Thank you." "You don't need to say anything, just go," he said with a wink. "You've earned it." That weekend I drove up to the cabin, leaving the city behind and everything that had happened with my father and Sharon. The cabin was tucked away in the woods, far from the noise of the world. It was quiet, peaceful, and exactly what I needed. I spent 2 days there, hiking in the forest, reading, and allowing myself to breathe without the constant pressure of family expectations. I came back from that weekend with a new sense of clarity. It wasn't just about escaping the drama. It was about realizing that I didn't have to be a part of it. I could choose my path. I could choose who I let into my life, and I could choose to move forward, leaving the toxicity behind. 3 months passed, and I found myself in a place I hadn't thought was possible, at peace. Sure, there were still moments when I'd hear something about Dad or Sharon through the grapevine, but it didn't sting like it used to. I didn't need them. They'd made their choices, and I'd made mine. I had my apartment. I had my career. And I had the people who truly mattered, the ones who showed up when I needed them the most. One evening, not long after the cabin trip, I got another call from Dad. I hesitated before answering, but something in me wanted to know what he had to say. "Julie." His voice was softer this time, no longer carrying the authority or anger it used to. "I know I've made a mess of things, and I know it's probably too late, but I wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. For not being there for you. For everything I put you through." I didn't say anything at first. I wasn't sure what to say. It felt like too much had happened, too many years of neglect, too much pain. But I knew that if I didn't respond, I would be denying myself a piece of closure. "I appreciate you saying that," I said, my voice calm. "But I don't know if I can forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I understand," he said finally. "I just wanted you to know I'm trying. I'm trying to be a better person. For you." I let out a slow breath. "We'll see," I said, "but don't expect anything to change overnight." And that was the end of the conversation. I didn't need to keep chasing closure or forgiveness. That wasn't for him. It was for me. I'd taken control of my life, and it felt good. It felt like freedom. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. My apartment, my career, my friends, they were my focus now. I wasn't going to let the past define me. I had my future to build, and I was more than ready to do just that. As the months went by, I started to notice something that I hadn't even realized I'd been missing: peace. For the first time in a long time, I didn't wake up with a knot in my stomach, worrying about what drama my father or Sharon would bring into my life. I didn't feel the weight of their expectations hanging over me. It was like I could finally breathe again. I was living life on my own terms, and that realization hit me harder than I expected. There were still moments where I'd think about my dad and Sharon, especially when I heard rumors or got the occasional text from him, trying to re-enter my life. But I wasn't looking to rewind the clock. I had a life to live, and it wasn't going to be defined by people who hadn't shown up for me when I needed them most. The truth was, I had learned to build my own family. It wasn't by blood, but by the people who showed up for me, who treated me with respect, who made me feel like I mattered. My cousins, my friends, even my co-workers, they became the family I had always longed for. They were the ones who stood by me, who celebrated my victories and supported me when things got tough. One of the most unexpected things I'd realized was how much I had underestimated myself. All those years of second-guessing and questioning whether I was enough had taken their toll, but now I knew I was worthy. I had earned everything I had, and no one, least of all my father, could take that away from me. Work had become my sanctuary too. I was growing in ways I hadn't expected. 2 years ago, I had been promoted, and the increase in responsibility had pushed me to my limits. But it had also taught me that I was capable of more than I ever thought possible. Thompson and Mills had given me a chance, and I was making the most of it. I wasn't just surviving in my job anymore. I was thriving. My confidence had skyrocketed, and that ripple effect spread into all areas of my life. I wasn't afraid to go after what I wanted, whether it was a new project at work or a weekend trip with my friends. I had learned that I didn't need to apologize for my success or my happiness. I was allowed to take up space. I was allowed to take care of myself. One weekend, about 6 months after the confrontation with my dad, I decided to take a solo trip. I hadn't done it in years. I had always been afraid to travel alone, to leave my comfort zone, but now it felt like the perfect time to step out of that shell. I booked a cabin by the lake, tucked away in the woods, and drove there without any real plan, just to clear my mind and disconnect for a while. The trip turned out to be exactly what I needed. I spent 2 days hiking, reading, and sitting by the water. There was something so freeing about being surrounded by nature, without the noise of the city or the weight of my family's expectations. For the first time in years, I felt truly, utterly at peace. I returned from that trip feeling lighter, like I had left all the old pain behind. It wasn't that I had forgiven Dad or Sharon, it was that I had learned to move past them. I wasn't going to be a hostage to my past anymore. A few weeks later, I ran into a familiar face. I was at a coffee shop one morning, catching up on emails, when I spotted a guy I recognized from my college days. His name was Daniel. We had a few classes together, but we hadn't spoken much. I noticed him looking at me, and when our eyes met, he smiled. "Julie, right?" he asked, walking over to my table. "Yeah, it's been a while," I said, smiling back. "How have you been?" We spent the next hour talking about old college memories, catching up on life. It felt easy, natural, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to put on a mask. I didn't feel like I had to explain my past or justify my choices. Daniel listened, but he didn't ask questions that made me feel uncomfortable. It was just two people connecting, and it was a breath of fresh air. By the end of our conversation, he asked if I'd like to grab dinner sometime. Normally, I might have hesitated, but not this time. Not after everything I had been through. I was open to new connections. I was ready for new experiences. We went out a week later. Dinner turned into drinks, then a long walk through the city. Daniel was easy to talk to, and I felt like I could truly be myself around him. No pretenses, no worries. It wasn't a fairy tale romance, but it was exactly what I needed at that moment. Someone who saw me for who I was, not for what I had been through. It was refreshing to feel like I wasn't defined by my family's drama or by the years of neglect I had experienced. Over the next few months, Daniel and I kept seeing each other. It wasn't fast or intense, but it was comfortable and real. I found myself opening up more, sharing pieces of my past that I had locked away. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to justify myself. Daniel wasn't perfect, no one was, but he made me feel safe in a way that I hadn't experienced before. Meanwhile, I continued to focus on my career. Thompson and Mills had offered me even more responsibility, and I had the chance to lead a new team. It was a challenge I had been waiting for, and I jumped in with both feet. I was proud of what I had accomplished, proud of who I had become. Things weren't perfect. Life never is. But I was in a better place now. I had learned to set boundaries. I had learned to prioritize myself. I had learned that the people who truly mattered would show up for me, and those who didn't? Well, I didn't need them in my life anymore. There were still moments when I thought about my father and the years of rejection. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. But I had accepted that they weren't going to change, and I wasn't going to keep waiting for them to. I had my own life to live, and I was going to live it on my terms. The phone calls from Dad eventually stopped. I never heard from Sharon or Amy again. It was clear they had moved on with their lives, and honestly, I had too. I was living my life now, surrounded by people who loved me, supported me, and treated me like I deserved to be treated. I wasn't defined by the past anymore. I was defining my future. The months that followed felt like a slow, steady climb to a place I never thought I'd reach. It wasn't about some grand achievement or reaching the pinnacle of success. It was about feeling grounded and knowing that no matter what, I was okay. I was more than okay. I was whole. Daniel and I had gotten closer, and while it wasn't the whirlwind romance that some people might expect, it was real. We took our time. We spent weekends exploring new places, trying new foods, and talking about everything and nothing all at once. He never made me feel like I had to rush into anything. We both took our time, healing from our pasts, learning who we were and what we needed from each other. There was something refreshing about it, the absence of pressure, the presence of honesty. I had learned to embrace the little things. The quiet mornings where I could sip coffee by my window, the rush of getting a project completed at work, and the way the people who mattered the most to me made me feel like I was enough. They made me feel seen. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my tea and scrolling through my phone, I saw a message from my Aunt Sarah. I hadn't heard from her in a while, and I felt a pang of nostalgia. "Julie, I know it's been a while, but I was wondering if you might be up for a visit this weekend. I'd love to spend some time with you, catch up and just enjoy a quiet day together. Let me know what you think." I felt a smile tug at my lips. Of course I was up for it. Aunt Sarah had always been a constant, a grounding force in my life when everything else seemed to fall apart. The weekend came, and I drove out to Aunt Sarah's house. Her place was cozy and peaceful, tucked in a quiet part of town, and we spent the day reminiscing and chatting about everything and nothing. It was just what I needed, and as we sat on her porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she said something that stuck with me. "You know, Julie," she said thoughtfully, "you've always been strong, even when you didn't realize it. You're living your life now in a way that your younger self would be proud of. I can see it. You've found peace." Those words hit me harder than I expected. It was like she had seen right through me, into the heart of who I was becoming. She was right. I had found peace, not in the absence of struggle or pain, but in the way I had learned to carry it with grace. I had found a place where I could stand on my own 2 feet, without relying on anyone else's approval or validation. I had learned to love myself in a way I hadn't thought was possible. A few days later, I got a call from my dad. It had been nearly a year since I'd last spoken to him. He had tried to reach out before, but each time I felt like I wasn't ready. This time, though, something felt different. Maybe it was because I had finally gotten to a point where I was strong enough to hear him out, or maybe it was because I had already made peace with everything. Either way, I answered. Julie. His voice cracked a little when he spoke. I know it's been a long time. I just wanted to call and check in. I understand if you're angry, but I just want to say I'm sorry. I didn't treat you the way you deserve to be treated. I wasn't there for you when you needed me most, and for that, I'm truly sorry. I felt a heaviness lift from my chest, but it wasn't relief. It was more like the quiet realization that I had already forgiven him, in my own way. Not because I had to, but because I had learned to let go of the anger. I appreciate you saying that, Dad, I said, my voice calm. But I've already moved on. You don't need to apologize anymore. It's not about that. I've forgiven you in my own way, but I've also created a life for myself that I'm proud of. I don't need you to be part of that anymore. I need you to understand that I did it without you, and that I'm okay. There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I wondered if he understood what I was trying to say. But then he spoke again, softer this time. I understand, Julie, I really do. I'm proud of you. I always was, even if I didn't show it. I could feel the finality of that conversation. We were both in different places now, but we were at peace with where we were. I wasn't looking for a perfect relationship. I wasn't waiting for him to make up for lost time. I had already done the hard work of healing myself. When the call ended, I didn't feel the need to look back. I had let go of that old chapter in my life. It was time to turn the page. A few weeks later, I sat down with Daniel and told him everything. All of it. The pain, the betrayal, the long years of silence and neglect. And for the first time, I didn't feel shame about it. It was just a part of me, a part of my past, and I wasn't afraid to share it anymore. Daniel listened without judgment, offering the kind of support I had always craved but never received from my father. As I spoke, I realized that I had finally come to a place where I was no longer defined by what had happened to me. I wasn't my father's disappointment or my stepmother's target or my half-sister's scapegoat. I was Julie, strong, independent, and whole. The next chapter of my life was mine to write, and I was more than ready to do it. And so, as I sat there with Daniel, watching the sun set over the city, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The future was wide open, and for the first time in my life, I was excited to see where it would take me. Story 2. I never imagined my son's college graduation would end like this. The ceremony at the University of Minneapolis was perfect. Blue skies, proud families, and the infectious joy of accomplishment in the air. Nathan had worked incredibly hard for his business degree, and I couldn't have been more proud. But what should have been one of the happiest days of our lives turned into something else entirely. I'm Anna, and after 25 years of marriage, I thought I knew my husband, Benjamin. We'd built a comfortable life in Minneapolis, raised our son, and I believed we were happy. I worked as a financial advisor while Benjamin managed his own consulting firm. We weren't wealthy, but we'd saved carefully over the years, planning for retirement and our son's future. That afternoon, as we gathered for photos after the ceremony, Benjamin was acting strangely. He kept checking his phone and glancing around nervously. His assistant, Rebecca, was there officially to help coordinate the celebration dinner, but something about her presence felt off. She was young, probably around 30, and had been working for Benjamin for the past 2 years. The moment came during the celebratory champagne toast. Benjamin stood up, champagne glass in hand, and I expected him to say something touching about Nathan's achievement. Instead, he cleared his throat and announced, "I have something important to share with everyone." The way he said it made my stomach drop. I'd seen that look before, in my line of work. I'd watched countless people try to hide their nervousness before making life-altering decisions. "I'm leaving," he continued, his voice steady but cold. "Rebecca and I are in love, and we're starting a new life together. I've already transferred our savings to ensure our fresh start." The silence that followed was deafening. Nathan's face went pale, and our guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Rebecca stood there with a triumphant smile, her hand resting positively on Benjamin's arm. But instead of the shock and devastation Benjamin clearly expected, I felt strangely calm. Maybe because I had seen this coming months ago. maybe because I'd already prepared for exactly this moment. I reached for my purse, feeling the weight of the envelope inside. 3 months earlier, I'd noticed the first red flag when reviewing our joint accounts, a series of unusual transfers and expensive hotel charges. As a financial advisor, I'm trained to spot irregularities. And these weren't just random splurges, they followed a pattern. The charges always appeared on days when Benjamin claimed to be working late. Minneapolis isn't that big of a city, and the same hotel name kept showing up the Market downtown, just 2 blocks from his office. Always on Wednesday nights, always the same suite. I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I started digging deeper. Working with numbers for 20 years had taught me patience and precision. I tracked every transaction, every receipt, every suspicious movement in our accounts. The evidence mounted steadily. Dinner reservations for 2 at expensive restaurants, jewelry purchases from Tiffany's, and first-class plane tickets to Caribbean destinations I'd never heard about. Then came the offshore account transfers. Benjamin thought he was being clever, hiding money in a Cayman Islands account. But he'd forgotten one crucial detail. I'd handled our taxes for the past 15 years. I knew every legitimate account, every investment, every penny we'd saved together. These new transactions stuck out like neon signs. The final confirmation came from my friend Laura in HR at Benjamin's firm. She'd called me. Voice hesitant. One afternoon in March. "Anna, I think there's something you should know." She'd said Rebecca just filed for a transfer to your husband's new satellite office in Bermuda. That was when I knew Benjamin wasn't just having an affair. He was planning an escape. The pieces fell into place. The hidden money, the secret accounts, the planned announcement. He'd chosen Nathan's graduation deliberately, thinking the public setting would prevent a scene. What he didn't know was that I'd already contacted my lawyer, Patricia. Together, we'd spent weeks preparing everything. The divorce petition, the asset freeze, the tax fraud evidence. I'd quietly moved our savings into a separate account, documented every suspicious transaction, and gathered proof of his affair. I took another sip of champagne, watching Benjamin's smug expression as he finished his announcement. He thought he had orchestrated the perfect exit. He had no idea that I was about to reveal my own carefully planned surprise. After Benjamin's announcement, Rebecca had the audacity to wave a first-class ticket in front of everyone. "Our flight to Bermuda leaves tonight." She gloated, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "We've already found the perfect beachfront property with your savings." The room erupted in shocked whispers. I could see Nathan's hands trembling with anger, his graduation cap still perched on his head. Our friends and family shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to leave or stay for what promised to be an explosive confrontation. Benjamin turned to me, his expression a mixture of triumph and pity. "I've left you enough for a few months." "Expenses," he said magnanimously. "I think that's more than fair, considering." "Considering what?" I interrupted, my voice steady. "Considering that I helped build your consulting firm from scratch, that I managed our finances while you focused on your career. Or considering that I've known about your plan for months." His smile faltered slightly. Rebecca's hand tightened on his arm. "What do you mean you've known?" she demanded, her confident facade cracking just a bit. I reached into my purse and pulled out the thick manila envelope I'd prepared. "You know, Benjamin, for someone who prides himself on attention to detail, you really should have been more careful with your email password, the one you've used for 20 years. Nathan's birthday? Not very original." The color began to drain from his face. I could see him mentally calculating, trying to remember what emails might be in that envelope. "Your plan was clever. I'll give you that." I continued standing up to face him directly. "Setting up the Bermuda account, planning this announcement for Nathan's graduation where you thought I wouldn't make a scene, but you forgot something crucial about me." "And what's that?" he managed to ask, his voice slightly hoarse. "I don't just manage our family's finances, I do this for a living." "Did you really think I wouldn't notice the transfers? The hotel charges? The secret account in the Caymans?" I smiled, enjoying the way his eyes widened with each revelation. Or maybe you thought Laura and HR wouldn't tell me about Rebecca's transfer request to your new Bermuda office? Benjamin's hands were shaking. Now. Rebecca had taken a step back, her triumphant smile replaced by uncertainty. "Here," I said, holding out the envelope before you leave for your new life. "You might want to look at this. Consider it my graduation gift to you both," as Benjamin took the envelope with trembling fingers. I savored the moment. Everything I discovered, everything I'd prepared was about to come to light. And the best part? He had no idea what was coming next. Benjamin's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. I watched with quiet satisfaction as he pulled out the stack of papers, his eyes widening as he scanned the first page. The divorce petition, already filed and stamped, seemed to mock his carefully laid plans. "What? What the hell is this?" he stammered, looking up at me with disbelief. I took another sip of champagne, savoring its crisp taste. "Oh, just some light reading before your romantic getaway," I replied sweetly. "You might want to pay special attention to page 3. Rebecca peered over his shoulder, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his arm as she read the bank statements. Showed our joint account's current balance 0. Every penny had been legally transferred weeks ago to an account solely in my name. "You can't do this," Benjamin sputtered, his face reddening. "That's our money." "Our money?" I interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "You mean the money you were planning to steal? The money you've been slowly siphoning into offshore accounts?" I gestured to the next set of documents. "Speaking of which, the IRS is very interested in your creative accounting methods." The color drained from his face as he flipped through the papers. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, email printouts detailing his affair with Rebecca, including their plans for this very announcement. Each page was another nail in the coffin of his escape plan. Nathan stood beside me now, his graduation gown rustling as he moved closer. "Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are really going to do this today of all days." Benjamin couldn't meet our son's eyes. Instead, he frantically shuffled through the remaining papers until he reached the court order freezing his assets. His hands shook so badly he nearly dropped it. "Everything's frozen," I explained calmly. "Your personal accounts, your business accounts, even that lovely little nest egg you thought you'd hidden in the Caymans. My lawyer is quite thorough." Rebecca's triumphant smile had completely vanished. "Babe, what's happening? What does she mean? Everything's frozen?" I turned to her with mock sympathy. "It means, dear, that your sugar daddy is officially broke." "Well, not broke exactly, just unable to access any of his money. I hope you kept your return ticket because it looks like that beachfront property in Bermuda might have to wait." The gathered guests watched in stunned silence. My friend Laura, who had helped expose their plan, tried unsuccessfully to hide a smile behind her hand. Benjamin's younger brother, Thomas, shook his head in disgust, while his wife, Catherine, whispered, "Good for you, Anna. You've ruined everything," Benjamin hissed. His facade of control completely shattered. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "No. You ruined everything the moment you decided to betray our family. I'm just making sure you face the consequences of your choices." The stack of papers slipped from his grasp, scattering across the floor like fallen leaves. Rebecca scrambled to pick them up, her face flushed with humiliation, as she realized their perfect plan was unraveling in front of everyone. Benjamin's composure crumbled as he reached the final document, a formal letter from his company's board of directors. His hands gripped the paper so tightly it crumpled at the edges. The letter detailed an immediate investigation into his relationship with Rebecca, citing potential abuse of power and misuse of company resources. "You went to the board," he whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "Actually, I didn't have to," I replied calmly. "It seems someone else noticed your inappropriate behavior with a subordinate. The ethics committee has been watching you for months." Rebecca's face went pale. "What does this mean for my position?" "Well," I said, setting down my champagne glass, "I believe the HR term is immediate termination, though, given the circumstances. Finding another job in Minneapolis might be challenging. Benjamin suddenly straightened, attempting to regain control of the situation. This is ridiculous. I built that company from nothing. They can't just. They can. And they have. I cut in the boards, quite concerned about potential lawsuits. Apparently, you're not the first executive to think he could use his position to pursue younger employees. Nathan stepped forward, his graduation cap now in his hands. I can't believe you did this, Dad. To Mom, to our family, to everything we've built. Son, you don't understand, Benjamin pleaded, reaching for Nathan's arm. Sometimes marriages just don't. Nathan jerked away from his touch. Don't try to justify this. You were going to steal Mom's savings and run away with your assistant on my graduation day. I understand perfectly. Rebecca, now gathering her composure, attempted to salvage what she could. Benjamin, they can't prove anything about us. We can fight this. I laughed, the sound sharp and clear in the tense atmosphere. The email thread where you both planned this entire scheme, including today's announcement, the hotel receipts, the witness statements from your co-workers, I think they can prove quite a bit. Several of our guests had quietly slipped away, but many remained. Watching the scene unfold with a mixture of shock and fascination, Benjamin's brother Thomas approached, placing a supportive hand on Nathan's shoulder. How long? Thomas asked, his voice heavy with disappointment. How long have you been planning to abandon your family? Benjamin? Silence was damning. Rebecca answered instead, her voice shrill with defensive anger. We've been in love for 18 months. We shouldn't have to hide it. 18 months? I mused, tapping my chin thoughtfully. Interesting. That's exactly how long I've been documenting everything. Every transaction, every meeting, every little lie. I had a feeling it might come in handy someday. The weight of realization crashed over Benjamin's face while he'd been meticulously planning his escape. I'd been 2 steps ahead, quietly building an ironclad case against him. His perfect plan, his dreams of a new life with his young assistant, his carefully hidden money, all of it was slipping through his fingers like sand. Benjamin made one last, desperate attempt to salvage his crumbling world. Anna, be reasonable, he said, lowering his voice to the persuasive tone he'd used so often in business negotiations. We can work something out, split everything 50-50. Keep this civil. 50-50. I echoed, genuine amusement in my voice. Of what, exactly? The money you tried to hide, the company that's about to terminate you, or perhaps you mean the house that's solely in my name. His head snapped up. What do you mean solely in your name? Remember last month when you were too busy to attend the mortgage refinancing meeting? You just signed the papers I brought home. I smiled, watching comprehension dawned on his face. You really should read documents before signing them, Benjamin. The house has been transferred to my name only. Rebecca grabbed Benjamin's arm, panic rising in her voice. What about the Bermuda property? Our deposit frozen along with every other transaction you've made in the last 6 months, I replied, though I suspect the property developer might be interested to know the funds were obtained fraudulently. Benjamin's face contorted with rage. You vindictive. Bye, Dad. Nathan's sharp voice cut through the air. Don't you dare finish that sentence. The remaining guests watched in stunned silence as Benjamin's carefully crafted facade finally shattered completely. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time, he looked his age. I've worked with your lawyer, Patricia, I continued calmly. She's prepared a fairly generous settlement offer, considering the circumstances. You can sign it now, or we can let the judge decide, after reviewing all this evidence. Your choice. Rebecca stepped away from Benjamin, her young face etched with dawning horror. You promised me security, she whispered to him. You said we'd have everything we needed. Oh, honey, I said, almost feeling sorry for her. He promised me security 225 years ago. Look how well that turned out. Thomas approached his brother, disgust evident on his face. The family lake house you've been maintaining for Mom and Dad. Have you been using that for your little rendezvous to Benjamin? Silence was answer enough. I'll tell them myself. Thomas spat. They should know what their son has become. Nathan, still in his graduation robes, squared his shoulders. "I think it's time for you both to leave," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "You've ruined enough of today already." I watched as Benjamin's world collapsed around him. His son's graduation, which he'd chosen as the stage for his grand exit, had instead become the scene of his ultimate humiliation. The whispers and stares of our guests, the disgust on his brother's face, the rejection in his son's eyes. It was all crashing down on him at once. "The settlement papers will be at Patricia's office on Monday," I said, gathering my purse. "Don't bother trying to access any accounts before then." "And Benjamin." I paused, meeting his defeated gaze. "I suggest flying coach to Bermuda. First class might be a bit out of your price range now." As Benjamin and Rebecca slunk away from the graduation celebration, I turned to our remaining guest with a bright smile. "Well, now that the unexpected entertainment is over, shall we properly celebrate Nathan's achievement?" Laura rushed forward to hug me. "Anna, that was absolutely brilliant," she whispered. "I've never seen Benjamin speechless before." Nathan wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "Mom, I can't believe you've been planning this for months without letting on." "How did you stay so calm?" "Years of handling other people's finances taught me patience," I replied. "Squeezing his hand and watching your father's schemes fall apart was worth every second of waiting." Thomas raised his glass to Anna, who just gave us the most satisfying show of justice I've ever witnessed, and to Nathan, whose graduation will certainly be remembered for years to come. The remaining guests laughed and clinked their glasses. The tension in the room dissolved into a celebratory atmosphere as everyone gathered around to congratulate Nathan properly. Catherine, Thomas's wife, pulled me aside. "That letter from the board, you timed everything perfectly, didn't you?" I smiled. The ethics committee had been building their case for months. I just made sure their announcement coincided with his planned escape. Timing is everything in finance and revenge. As we moved the celebration to the restaurant I'd reserved, notably not the one Benjamin had planned to use, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of Benjamin's betrayal and deception had been replaced by a sense of triumph and freedom. Nathan leaned over and whispered, "Best graduation gift ever, Mom." 2 weeks later, I sat across from Patricia in her downtown Minneapolis office reviewing the final divorce settlement. Benjamin had signed everything without protest. The fight completely drained from him after our graduation day confrontation. The company's ethics investigation had revealed even more than I'd uncovered. 3 other young assistants had come forward with stories of Benjamin's inappropriate behavior. The board had terminated him immediately. His reputation in the business community thoroughly destroyed. Rebecca, facing her own professional crisis, had quickly abandoned their plans for a new life together. Last I heard, she'd moved back to Chicago to live with her parents. Her dreams of being a trophy wife in Bermuda thoroughly shattered. The house is secure, the assets are protected, and the tax fraud evidence has been handed over to the proper authorities, Patricia said. Organizing the final papers, I'd say this is one of the cleanest divorces I've handled, despite the circumstances. Nathan, who'd accepted a job offer in Minneapolis, took me to dinner that evening. "You know, Mom, I've been thinking about what you did, how you handled everything so strategically. Would you consider doing some financial consulting for my new company?" I smiled, touched by his faith in me. "I might be interested, though. I hope you've learned to read the fine print on any documents before signing them." He laughed. "Trust me, that's one lesson our whole family won't forget." As we enjoyed our dinner, I felt at peace. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just about getting even. It's about emerging stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever comes next. Story 3. It was 7:15 a.m. I was in Nashville when I got the email that broke my heart. Unaware that her father had just blown our life up with a single message, my 1-year-old daughter Emma was blissfully chattering in her high chair. "Moving on" was merely the subject line. When I opened the attachment and saw the picture, I nearly spilt my coffee. My spouse of 5 years, Donald, encircled a young blonde woman who couldn't have been more than 23. They were positioned in front of our lake house, which we had purchased only a year prior. It was the same house where we had spent many weekends discussing our future plans. The email said, I now own the house. Amber and I have already moved in together. The divorce paperwork will be forwarded by my attorney. Don't struggle with it. I am the owner of the deed. As I put down my coffee mug, I noticed that my hands were shaking, but not because of terror. No. I was becoming enraged at this. Donald genuinely believed that he could just give me divorce papers via email and take our vacation house, the house I had purchased with my business's earnings. He was unaware of what was about to happen. I observed our kid playing with her meal, still naive and joyful. I then took a quick look at the framed picture hanging on our kitchen wall. On our wedding day, Donald and I were beaming as if we had everything all out. 5 years of marriage. And he decided to end it this way, with a picture of himself with a lady almost half my age and a smug email. I inhaled deeply before picking up my phone. Before I clicked block, my finger briefly lingered over Donald's contact details. I then opened my email and replied with 2 short phrases. "Are you certain of that? You should thoroughly review the documentation." I smiled, clicked send, blocked his email, and turned back to my kid. I was constantly undervalued by Donald. He viewed me as the understanding spouse who had helped him with his profession while also starting my own side company. He likely assumed that I would cry and even plead with him to change his mind, but he had overlooked one important aspect of me. Being careless about safeguarding my assets did not lead to the success of my business. In hindsight, I should have anticipated this. There were signs. I ignored minor warning signs because I was too preoccupied with managing our new baby and my expanding business. Over the previous 3 months, Donald had been visiting the lake house on a regular basis for work, saying he required quiet time to work on a major corporate merger. I supported his professional decisions while starting my own business from the ground up. I was already operating a profitable internet store when we first met 6 years ago, but Donald pretended it was simply a fun pastime. He enjoyed sharing with others how he had assisted me in making it a reality. The reality. Since we were married, the worth of my business has tripled. I had come up with the idea for the lake house via my own diligence and careful preparation, the ideal retreat for our family. It's remote enough to feel like a true getaway, yet close enough to Nashville for weekend getaways. Donald had insisted on having his name appear on the deed for tax considerations, even though I had paid for it in full with the earnings from my business. He had stated, I had consented, but not before having my attorney create a few extremely detailed paperwork regarding the real owner of the property. When I questioned Donald about the merger last week, he was particularly aloof and spent hours on his phone in our home office. He became defensive, accusing me of not comprehending the intricacies of corporate finance. Rich, from a man whose investments I had been covertly overseeing over the last 3 years. I took Emma out of her high chair and cradled her in my arms, inhaling her delightful infant aroma. Her eyes were Donald's, but I was determined. It was already evident in the way she approached each new task. Now that I was looking at her, I was more determined. It was no longer just about me. It was also about safeguarding her future. With Emma on my hip, I made my way to my home office and turned on my laptop. I sent the paperwork indicating I had bought the lake house to my lawyer via email in a matter of minutes. Next, I viewed the stream from the security camera I had put on the property. One more safety measure. Donald had no clue. Everything had been captured on camera. Each visit, each visitor, each betrayal. Amber may have been celebrating her win at the lake home, but she was unaware that she was the subject of a film that would play a significant role in my divorce case. It buzzed on my phone. Julia, my helper Rachel, texted me, "This is something you must see." A link to Amber's Instagram page was included. Dozens of pictures of her with Donald date back months. She even wore my clothing and used my belongings in several of the photos that were taken in our bedroom at the lake house. In the most recent post, she was seen showing off a huge diamond band that belonged to my grandmother. Donald had promised that we would give Emma the ring on her 18th birthday. I was ill. This was not a new incident. Before Emma was even born, this had been happening. 8 months ago, Amber proudly displayed a key to the lake house in one of the pictures, reading the caption, "With my eyes and love heart, home, sweet home." Moving in together is a new phase. When our infant kept me up all night. A woman who had just graduated from college had been playing house with Donald. His professional travels coincided exactly with the dates on the pictures. He had always stated that he needed to check on the lake cottage, which was why he was working late every weekend. All of it had been false. My hands are trembling. I launched the banking app. The second blow came at that moment. I put money into a joint account for Emma's college fund, but it was empty. Each and every dime. Almost $100,000. Lost. The anger I had felt previously was transferred out yesterday to an account I didn't recognize. Changed into something calculating and frigid, I immediately phoned my bank. Next, my attorney. I had confirmation in an hour. For months, Donald had been methodically transferring funds in anticipation of this day. He had even attempted, but failed, to access my company accounts. At least those were safeguarded by separate financial systems and unbreakable contracts. I was talking to the attorneys on the phone when Rachel phoned. Julia. There's more. A number of screenshots from Amber's private Facebook page were forwarded to me by her. The girl had been boasting to her pals about how she had found a wealthy older guy and how they intended to demand the full value of his uninteresting wife. Even jokes about how unaware I was and how preoccupied I was with my small internet store to see what was going on were included in the communications. They had no idea that my small internet store had tripled my fortune. In order to give Donald the impression that my company was only successful and not extremely profitable, I had kept that knowledge secret. He had never been able to examine my company's books well enough to fully comprehend what I had created because of his ego. I glanced at Emma, who was now soundly sleeping in her playpen. "Baby girl, don't worry," I muttered. "Daddy is going to learn a valuable lesson from Mommy about the undervaluation of women in the corporate world." Over the following several hours, I was quite busy. Sarah, my attorney, showed up at my place shortly before noon. As we were going over paperwork at my home office, Emma and Rachel had a snooze upstairs while maintaining watch. I had increased the house's security. I had a feeling Donald wouldn't accept my email reply. Sarah looked at the documents for the lake house and commented, "Well, he's not as clever as he thinks. We have unquestionable evidence that your company's finances were used to buy the home, even if the deed is in his name. The contracts, the transfer documents, and even the emails in which he acknowledges that it was your money. Everything is here." I pulled up my laptop's security camera feeds and nodded. "There's more. Take a look at this." Throughout the previous months, the video captured Donald and Amber coming inside the lake house at different occasions. However, Sarah was particularly intrigued by the video that was shot 2 days ago. It included Donald hauling box after box of household goods, including a few artworks I had bought with my help. Earnings. That is an effort to steal company property. "Making notes," Sarah said. "For tax reasons, the art collection was bought via your business. The paperwork is with us." At that moment, a call from an unidentified number appeared on my phone. I switched it to speaker mode. "Don't you think you're really intelligent?" Donald's tone was abrasive and irate. "Julia, check your work email. My solicitors have also been quite busy." I felt sick to my stomach as I opened my email. In an emergency petition, Donald's solicitors claimed that my company was founded on his contacts and experience. During the divorce process, they were requesting temporary control of my company's finances, as well as a thorough audit. "You would make a sincere effort to keep me company." My heart was pounding, but I spoke steadily. "I founded the business before I ever met you." "You constructed." He chuckled icily. "Who do you believe provided you with all of these business contacts? Who put you in touch with the appropriate people?" "Julia, you have to face it. Without me, you would be nothing." Amber is aware of that. She understands how to express gratitude. Sarah was already typing frantically on her laptop when I turned to her and silenced the phone. She gestured with her finger. "Hold on." "Donald." The phone was unmuted by me. Purchasing time. "Give your actions a lot of thought. Yes, my solicitors will contact me regarding Emma as well. You can't be a good mother because you're too preoccupied with your valuable business. Amber gets along well with children. She was a nanny once. The idea of taking Emma chilled my blood. But Sarah brought her laptop to me before I could reply. A 3-year-old email that Donald had sent to a buddy bemoaning my success was displayed on the screen. She is completely unreceptive to my business suggestions, claims she doesn't require my assistance. She is correct. Her business is now worth more than my yearly wage. It's embarrassing. Into the phone, I grinned. I just emailed your lawyer something, Donald. Before threatening my business further, you might want to ask him. What are you discussing? Let's pretend you didn't realize how private your email archives were. Call off your solicitors, or I'll send your boss an email next. What would he think of all those business relationships you say you've given me? There was silence on the cue. Next, click. When Rachel stormed into the office, Sarah was still going through Donald's emails. She had a pallid face. You must see this immediately, Julia. She pushed her iPad across from me. A draft press statement from Donald's business announcing his elevation to Chief Financial Officer, effective next month, was shown on the screen. All of a sudden, everything fell into place. When he had an affair with Amber, the strong legal strategy and the strategic maneuvers with our accounts. It was more than simply abandoning me. Prior to his major promotion, he was cleaning house in an effort to protect his assets and reduce the amount of money he would lose in a divorce. There's more. Rachel flipped to a different page. Amber is not your typical girlfriend. She is the niece of the CEO. It seemed as though someone had hit me in the stomach. There was no younger lady that Donald had fallen in love with. In order to get promoted, he had planned a connection with the CEO's niece. The stolen money, the lake mansion, including the Emma-related threats, all of this was part of his plan to begin a new life with his ideal, well-connected young bride as a CFO. Sarah raised her head from her computer. I discovered something else, Julia. Donald has been involved in the corporate merger. One of your main rivals in business is involved. He will have access to information that might cause significant harm to your business if he is appointed CFO. I balled my hands into fists. Donald wasn't only attempting to harm me, he was setting up shop to demolish what I had constructed. I recalled all the evenings he had spent working on merger paperwork in his home office. Instead, has he been looking through my business files? Verify the activities on my home network, I informed Rachel. Pay attention to any efforts to get access to my company's servers. Sarah discovered something more while Rachel was at work. Take a look at these 6-month-old emails that Donald and Amber exchanged. Even before Emma could walk, they were making plans for this. We can utilize the insider knowledge to force Julia's firm out of the market once you're CFO, Amber wrote. Uncle Robert promises to assist. The thought of them conspiring against me while I was taking care of our newborn baby made me feel nauseous. However, they had become careless due to their conceit. They had left a trail of evidence that may damage the CEO's reputation in addition to Donald's advancement. My thoughts were interrupted by Rachel's words. I located it. Donald's laptop made many attempts to access your company's servers. Although he tried, he was unable to breach your security. Corporate espionage is what that is. I got up and went to the window to see Emma play with her favorite plush elephant in her playpen. Donald believed he was very smart for securing his future through his connection with Amber. However, he had overlooked the most crucial business lesson. Sarah, you should never undervalue your opponent. I consult my lawyer once more, write a letter to the board of directors of the company, and include proof of Donald's attempted corporate espionage and the CEO's use of insider information against a rival. Include the security footage showing Donald robbing the lake house of company property. How about Amber? Rachel inquired. I grinned glumly. The way their CEO used a family member to assist in planning corporate espionage will likely pique the board's interest. Do you not? My phone buzzed with a lake house security system alert just as we were getting ready to send the email to the board. Donald had returned, and he was not by himself. Amber was not alone with him. Her Uncle Robert, the CEO, was also present. They entered the house carrying boxes. More of my stuff, of course. Watching the live feed, I told Sarah to wait. Let's first observe their actions. We could see them in the living room through the security cameras. The sound was very clear, another feature that Donald was unaware of. With champagne glasses in hand, they were celebrating, for the aspiring CFO. To Donald and my lovely niece, who made it all possible, Robert raised his glass. "Julia doesn't know what's going to happen." Donald chuckled. "The board will announce my promotion tomorrow morning, and by the afternoon, our legal team will have access to her company's financial records for auditing purposes. Her business will be worthless in a month." "What's the best part?" Amber added her voice. "Her biggest issue, in her opinion, is the lake house. Hold off until she learns of the offshore accounts?" I went cold. "Rachel." "What?" "Offshore accounts." Rachel's fingers flew across her keyboard. Within minutes, her face darkened. "Found them. Donald's been funneling money from your joint accounts into offshore holdings for months. Not just Emma's college fund, he somehow managed to divert nearly $300,000. This was bigger than I imagined. Donald hadn't only been intending to leave me, he'd been methodically stealing from our family for months. The lake house controversy was only a distraction from his broader plot. But then Robert said something that made my blood run cold. "Once Julia's company tanks, our merger goes through smoothly. Her market share will be shared across our businesses, and that difficult ethical business strategy of hers will be nothing but a memory." My firm wasn't just thriving, it was disrupting their whole industry with our devotion to sustainable standards and fair labor. This wasn't simply about Donald's promotion or his romance. They intended to demolish what I'd constructed because it endangered their way of doing business. "Send the email," I told Sarah. "Add one more item before, though. Go to the backup server. Enter Emma's birthday password and include the insurance file." When Sarah opened the file, her eyes sprang wide. It had years' worth of records regarding dubious activities at Donald's business. Data that I had acquired while overseeing his financial account. I never imagined that I would need it. Therefore, I had saved it as insurance. "Julia." Rachel looked at her screen and interrupted. "Donald recently made another attempt from the lake house to access our company's systems. He's becoming desperate." Donald excused himself to the home office, and I saw it on tape. My office at home. Our IT staff was prepared when he sat at my desk, most likely attempting to breach my company account once more. They had set up a phony gateway to give him the impression that he was winning. "Let him in. Let him believe he is one," I told Rachel, because their entire house of cards collapses in around 10 minutes after that board email is sent. Sarah raised her head from her computer. "Are your emails ready? Shall I press the send button?" I glanced at the security footage one final time. Robert, Donald, and Amber were still rejoicing over their fictitious triumph. Take action. The speed of the response exceeded my expectations. Robert's phone rang through the security stream just minutes after Sarah sent the email. As he listened to what I imagined was the board's initial response, we saw his face become pale. "Are you referring to an urgent meeting?" He called out into the telephone. "Who sent it? What proof?" Presumably checking his email, Donald reached for his own phone. He lost the color in his face. She knew the servers. Julia was aware of my attempt to gain access to them. It improves. As we watched the drama play out, I murmured to Sarah, "Await it." Amber's phone began exploding with alerts just in time. All of the board members had received anonymous private Facebook messages from her, the ones where she boasted that she had assisted Donald in stealing company data. The precise moment their joy descended into terror was captured on the surveillance camera. Robert yelled into his cell phone. Donald was attempting desperately to shut down his laptop. With mascara streaming down her cheeks, Amber was crying. Then, with house lights blazing, the coup de grace police cars approached the lake. It turns out that financial fraud and business espionage are significant offenses. Who could have known? As we watched via the cameras, I took Emma in my arms and hugged her close. "Take a look at that newborn girl. That is the result of others undervaluing your mother." Donald being brought out in handcuffs was the last thing I saw before the stream stopped. He continued to yell that the house belonged to him. The aftermath was stunning. Robert and Donald were both dismissed within a day. The board's inquiry revealed years of fraudulent activities, in addition to the conspiracy against my firm, which I was unaware of. Amber's promising influencer career was ruined by her involvement in corporate espionage. She had returned to Ohio to live with her parents, as far as I knew. Investigations were conducted, and the offshore accounts were blocked. Donald was given back all of the money he had taken, plus interest. The lake house. As it happens, trying to steal business property is a surefire way to forfeit any property rights. The deed was moved to my name, as it ought to have been from the beginning. In an attempt to make amends, Donald sent long emails detailing how he had lost himself and how a younger lady and authority had tempted him. I never answered. The divorce documents were unambiguous. He lost everything he attempted to pilfer, plus more. He would never again work in finance because of the proof of his corporate espionage. In my case, following the controversy, even more investors were drawn to my firm because of its moral business practices. We entered markets that were previously controlled by Donald's firm. Customers who had lost trust in established organizations were drawn to us because of our reputation for integrity. Now creating new memories, Emma and I used to spend weekends at the lake house. I occasionally think about Donald's arrogant email with that picture while I'm sitting on the balcony and watching her play. He believed he was declaring triumph, but in reality he was only recording the start of his demise. By the way, I saved that email. A reminder to never undervalue a woman who has created something valuable is framed in my workplace.